Hey everyone, welcome to Cuberviews episode 52. This is your host Ian Braverman. I hope you're having a great day. Today I am joined by Ryan Overturf. How you doing?
Doing great. How are you, Ian?
I'm excited to have you on. I've loved so much of the content that you've put out over the years, like the 540. I listened to every episode, SCG Tour Commentator, the 180, your most recent Cube podcast project that I've been listening many episodes for. Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. How's your day going so far?
Yeah, pretty well. And I do want to say 52 is the exact number of episodes we got on the 540. So this is kind of
Wow.
serendipitous.
Wow. That's crazy. Well, it worked out.
Hopefully, many more for you, and hopefully many more for 180 MTG.
Yes. I'm sure many people have heard of you in the audience, but for people who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like you said, my accolades, I've been doing Cube stuff for a few years. That's mostly been at StarCityGames.com. More recently, I've been doing that kind of on my own. And I have done commentary. I've actually been back in the booth this last year. I did coverage for a couple regional championships and one of the Spotlight Series events. So I'm hopeful to have more opportunities there. I've been playing Magic for over 20 years. I love the game. I love talking about the game, playing the game, sharing it with people. And it's really cool the way that it's grown over time too. When I got into it, I was in high school and it was kind of like embarrassing, or I was embarrassed. You know, when you are in high school, everything you do feels embarrassing.
Yeah.
But I assure you the game was nowhere near as big as it is now. Way more socially acceptable, which is way cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've won two SCG Opens. What formats were those in and what decks were you playing?
So the first was a Legacy Open. That was back in 2012. That was so old Legacy, oldish Legacy.
Before
That
Psychic
was
Frog?
yeah, well before Psychic Frog. Yeah, that was with Teamer Delver before Teamer was a thing. So Rug Delver, we called it back in the day. And then the other open win was a team win. So it was standard, modern, legacy. I was our modern seat. And that was another teamer deck, actually. That was a teamer Arcalite Phoenix deck. So it was more popular to play Is It? And this was maybe the one weekend where you could get away with playing Traverse the Ilvenwald. So like this is like Faithless Looting is going to get banned, but it's like still legal in the format. And it's just before people started main decking Surgical Extraction. And this was like the only weekend where you could like get away with going more in onto the graveyard in the main deck.
Wow, you found your opening. You just came in at the right time, right before it got banned, not enough graveyard. Hey, you were ready.
Yeah, well, more lucky than ready, but luck is really important when it comes to tournament success.
I usually just bring bad decks to when I played constructed anyway. So,
Yeah, so you understand the need for luck.
and for people who haven't heard of it, ConnectiCube is going to be a 64-person cube event that I'm going to be hosting with friends and just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, February 28th and March 1st. The Discord link is going to be in the description. So, Ryan, you've commentated for CubeCon. Tell me about cube events and your journey with cube events.
I have less experience with cube events than I'm sure that you do. It's kind of something where I've played a lot more of my cubes and I've done a lot of like the digital cubes on Magic Online, Magic Arena. I know how hard I work on my cubes, and so I can be a little bit hesitant to approach somebody else's cube with like, because I know how long you're in the experimental phase, right? And I know how much work and how difficult it is to hammer things out. And I do like collaborating with other people in the cube space, like going to play somebody else's cube when they are really earnestly working on it, when they want to pick your brain, share their thoughts, hear your thoughts. But then I also know that Magic players can be pretty stubborn about feedback. So I'm trying to branch out more, but I haven't done too many cube events.
Yeah, definitely at the cube cons and different cube events I've been at, there have been some, I would say, experimental cubes.
For sure. I hear about some wacky ones, and I do like learning more about kind of the more out there designs and what's going on with the designers. When I first heard, you heard about the ball pit? That's one that's
Yes, I
kind of been
want to
making the
play that
rounds.
one. I put it as like one of my number ones at CubeCon multiple times. I just never got in. It was too popular.
I heard about it, and it sounds like really not my thing, like really not for me. But Lucky Paper did an interview with the curator, Jane, and her insights. One of the things she said is like, I want to teach people about magic, and one of the things you might learn is that you don't like this kind of magic. And like going in, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. And just like having her own that this isn't for everybody, because like a lot of people will tooth and claw, they'll write like 12-page Cube Cobra write-ups, and it's like, if you don't like it, you haven't thought about it enough, and just being like, yeah, you might not like this. I love that.
You might hate this cube, but some people will love it.
It's art.
Yes, it's definitely an art piece. And what are some of your hobbies outside of magic?
Well, so I'm really into both competitive and casual magic. So it's kind of like two big hobbies itself. Most other things I kind of dabble in. I read, watch TV, listen to music, play some other board games. I'm like a very casual video game player. I was playing a little bit of the new Pokemon game today, but like I don't like difficult video games because I get enough of that with Magic.
Doing some Nuzlocks?
No, 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 no. I'm like mashing A on the easy, whatever. I loved Pokemon Scarlet and Violet because it was so basic and simple. Like it was a new game, so like I don't know all the Pokemon anymore. It's been years since that's been the case. And that game was like you could drive around on a motorcycle, but if you jumped off a mountain, you didn't take fall damage. Like it's just the opposite of a Dark Soul game. It's completely forgiving, no sharp edges, and that's what I want out of a video game.
Yeah, not the Pokemon Elden Ring, I would say.
Right.
And today, I'm really excited to talk to you about Twoberts because in my mind, you're kind of like the Twobert professor. What about Twoberts gets you so excited and why have you latched so much onto them?
Well, it was something that for a long time I had a regular cube group, and me and my friend Mike and kind of our extended friend group, we would always try to get together with eight. It was always Mike and I plus whoever else, and it regularly happened that Mike and I either were the only people that showed up or were the people that were closing the house down. And so did a lot of two-player drafts. And he always encouraged me to design something specifically for two players. Like if you've done much drafting larger cubes with two players, there's some consistency issues, or you can like add extra rules or more cards, which is also kind of bogs it down to try to finesse that. But it was still playing, it was still fine. So I never like felt a need to design for two because I always wanted to play with eight anyway. And then in 2020, COVID happened. And so getting together with eight was kind of a non-starter. And that kind of gave me the motivation to work on that cube for two players. And at first it was like, okay, I'm doing this because this is what the world is telling me to do, like the state of the world. And then once I put something together, we started playing it, and it was just like lightning in a bottle. Sometimes you build a cube and it's like, all right, that didn't work. I like this. I don't like this. And yeah, I've done a bunch of different cubes with two players or different two-player draft formats, and they all tend to be fine with give and take. But this was something that as soon as we started playing it, it was like, okay, this actually totally rules. And I've kind of just been really on it since.
I've built a tuber before, and I think it's a really interesting design space because, I mean, logistically and literally, it's a cube that is 180 cards. So it's meant to be drafted with two players compared to a cube that's 360 or 540 or 450. But I think really it's a lot deeper than that. There's a lot of different types of strategy and a lot of different types of design that goes into a 180 size pool compared to a 360 that I'm excited to be talking with you about today.
Yeah, for sure. It was actually the kind of thing where, back in like 2016 or whatever, I had started a page on Cube Tutor, rest in peace, Cube Tutor. Since then we've all been on Cube Cobra, but I had like 12 cards or something. I couldn't figure it out at all. And that's just like to illustrate kind of how long the journey was and how different the design is. And kind of the big thing I latched onto in developing 180 cards is like, how do you make this playable? And what I landed on is that if you treat every color like it's a deck, like make sure that every card that is mono white plays with every mono white card. If you shuffle together five decks, you can probably draft two decks. You know what I mean? And that is so different from how I was used to thinking about 360 card cubes. And it's worlds different from how you think about 540 card cubes. So it's a lot closer to like building constructed decks. And I actually think that the exercise, as I've worked on more and more with different themes, it's really close to designing commander decks, where you think about with commander, now they have that new bracket system.
Hmm.
Like when you're just like balancing it, it just kind of abstractly when you're on a page, it's like, is this a bracket one commander deck? Like that kind of guides, are there going to be combos here? Like what's the general atmosphere and everything just kind of have the same vibe across. And you're also thinking about, would I play these all in the same deck, which is, building a deck.
Yeah. And with a tuber, it's 180 cards. So, of course, you're not going to be able to do eight people's 45 cards to have a full eight-person draft. I
Right.
have built weird smaller cubes that are meant for eight players, like my Bolt cube that you draft two packs of 10, and then it actually can fit eight people in a full pod. But what are the different ways that you actually draft 180 card cube? Because it actually does fit four people, 45 times four. That does fit nicely into a four-person draft. But of course, it's Tuber. You built it for two people, right?
Right. Yeah. So initially the design was, okay, I need to play this with two. But then one of the first questions I had to ask as I'm fleshing out the list is, how many cards is this going to be? And maybe that sounds like putting the cart in front of the horse, but for me, it's really difficult to move towards a goal if I don't know what the goal is. If I'm just putting cards on a list, I can maybe build something, but if I don't know what I'm building, it's hard to say if putting more cards on the list is actually productive or not. And I decided that if I put 180 cards in a list, it could be drafted with four. And if it can be drafted with four, then you certainly can draft it with two. So let's try that out. And initially, we did a ton of playing with two, but it was really my second Tubert design, the Tempo Tubert, which is a lot of low to the ground, aggressive, like legacy, modern staple kind of stuff, Monastery Swiss Beer, Delver's Secrets. And that cube, we started drafting four. And I used to hate drafting with four players. Like I've talked about how like two-player drafts can be rough around the edges, but they're still pretty fun. Four-player drafts with like a 360 card cube or a 540 card cube, I think are awful. Like every deck is just playing too many colors with not enough mana fixing, or like there's disparity from deck to deck. Like it's so inconsistent. Like those environments are not designed for that. And it shows in the decks and in the games. And as soon as we started drafting that tempo tuber with four players, I was like, this is actually fun. And that increased my motivation to design more environments. Like the fact that it's good with two and four, and then 360 or 540 will be good with six or eight. And just like picking the right tool for the job is how I would describe it.
So when you're drafting with two people, what are the different ways that you do it? Because I've done it in a few ways. I've done Winston draft, I've done grid draft, I've done another format where it's like you burn cards. I know that you're a big fan of Minneapolis draft. What are your favorite ways to draft with two people?
Yeah, I've done like the Winston, the Grid. I remember when we first drafted Grid, it felt like such a level up for Winston. But the Minneapolis draft is honestly, I haven't looked back ever since I developed that. So, Ian, you were telling me you don't know how this one works. So
I don't
I can
know.
break it. I can break it down for you if you'd
I want
like.
to learn. Let's learn.
All right. So you got two players. You're going to each make eight 7 card packs. So that's going to be 112 cards out of the cube. So you draft more than half of it, but less than all of it. Simultaneously, you're going to open packs. So you look at your pack of 7 cards. You're going to get one first pick and then trade packs. You get two second picks. You trade back. There's now 4 cards in the pack. You're going to take two of those, and the last 2 cards in the pack are removed from the draft face down. So it's technically burned, but I think when people talk about burn drafting, it's usually a deliberate choice kind of in the middle of the pack. I don't like that so much. The idea here is that you're like making a decision on your last pick is what it does. And kind of what this draft style is trying to do is emulate a lot of the decision making in drafting with more players. So you open up a pack and get your first pick, which is already different from Winston and Grid, right? Like you're looking at a booster pack. So it's trying to do that, which you usually do with more players. You get a first pick. I love that. And then passing it and the other player getting two, that kind of simulates as if there's more players at the table. Like you don't just think about what's the second best card. You have to think about, okay, what combinations of cards are still going to be here? Which combinations are going to go? And then you do kind of maintain a little bit of that fog of war. You don't have three opponents drafting with two versus four. Only half of those last four cards you pass are going to end up in your opponent's pool. So you can't really account for everything. So you don't know what they first picked. You don't know what they last picked. And so there's a lot to kind of gamify between two players, which I love about it.
Oh, that is interesting that you don't know what they last pick because it gets burned. Oh, that is
Yeah.
interesting. Cool. Yeah, because when I do grid draft, it's like a pretty interesting situation where you really see every card that your opponent's picking. So you can kind of
hmm
really hate draft them. Like my friend Ryan, he always super hate drafts me when we do grid draft. He's like, I know that you want these three. I don't even care if I'm going to get good cards in this pack. I'm just going to make your deck terrible.
See, and that is kind of pushing the draft in the direction of what I don't like or haven't historically liked about four or two-player drafts, right? And like that's part of the game, right? If you're gridding and it's face up, the game is encouraging you to do some of that. And so what Minneapolis draft does is it discourages that a little bit, or at least makes it risky. Like I don't actually know what you first picked. I don't know what you last picked. I know what two cards you took in the middle, but is that enough information to effectively hate draft you? And can I take enough cards of the pack to execute on it? You can do it a little. It's certainly a part of it. Like you don't want to pass a card that you don't think you can beat, but you also just kind of have to focus on drafting your own deck, which I really like.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And yeah, so getting more into the actual like design of a tubert. So when it comes to like the proportions of different types of cards you're putting into the cube, like for example, when I'm building a cube, I usually try to have like 16 to 18% lands. So in a 360, I try to have like 50, 60 lands. So it's a pretty high amount of lands. I like to have a decent amount of removal in the cube, have a good amount of creatures and threats to interaction. When you're building the proportions of these types of things, lands, interactions, creatures, do you basically just take 360 and divide that by two? Or is it different because it's a two-player draft and just like the way that the draft is actually ran?
I do find that for a lot of those things, you do just kind of math it out. So when I draft with eight or when I design eight-player cubes, I have a preference for 360 cards, and it tends to be that I like to have five or six cycles of dual lands, and then some other number of mana fixing, like your five color stuff, City of Brass, whatever. And yeah, just cut it in half. I generally like three cycles of dual lands for a Tubert. Depending on which lands you use, that can modulate the numbers a little, but I never go much higher or much lower typically. Like the removal and interaction consideration is a little less mathy. That one's a little bit more looking at what the environment needs. Because when you are designing a singleton cube with more cards, you think about volume of interaction, but it also matters if you have the best in class versions. Like, I want to have a lot of interaction if my interaction is maybe a little bit more middling, or like my deck doesn't have the best threat, so I need to make it up with that for more interaction. But when the cube list is just smaller and you are generally drafting more of the cube, or in the four-player drafts, drafting all of the cube, you're going to have the best in class versions of every card in your deck. So something I definitely notice when I'm designing is I make a point to get interaction in there and to get a good volume. But there's a line you can cross, and you will certainly know when you've crossed it, even just doing like a bot draft on Cube Cobra, where it's like there are so many removal spells, and if I'm prioritizing them highly, I look at my deck and I could easily kill every threat in my deck, and I don't know if I can win if everybody at the table is doing this. And so you got to be mindful of that kind of thing for sure.
I've definitely seen those kind of like, oh, I drafted red black removal, and that's my whole deck.
Yeah. For sure. And like it does really cut both ways. It's like your red black removal deck, it's like I can kill everything, but also it's just like all of my cards are kill spells. Like how do I actually eliminate my opponent?
Yes, mill them out. And that kind of leads me to my next question of like, how does it being a two-person draft actually affect the cube design itself? Like, do you go into designing a cube for two players with this particular format of drafting it in mind? Like, do you think, okay, this is a grid draft. So in a grid draft, both of the two players are going to see every card. And because they see every card, there's nothing that's going to be left out to that player unless the other player had the row or column pick first, compared to like a Minneapolis draft where you might not see all the cards. They're going to take two. You're not going to see them all. Cards are going to get not taken at the end or burned. Does the actual format, do you draft it, affect your cube design?
I'm sure that it does. I will say regarding answering this question, I really only Minneapolis draft with two players these days. I do think that it is just the most fun. Subjectively, I enjoy it the most. And I have my bias, it is a format that I came up with or whatever. So you can say whatever you want to say, but I encourage you to try it before you say whatever you say. When it comes to grid draft, like you're gonna use more total cards. So that's gonna put less pressure on the things that I'm very mindful of. When it comes to Minneapolis draft and just drafting with two versus drafting with four, I do think that a 180 card cube drafted that way, where you draft 8-7 card packs and you draft 112 cards, it puts a lot of pressure on the lower side of the power band. It becomes pretty unforgiving to have cards that are weaker than the other cards in the cube. If they're just not appealing relative to what's going on, you just don't have space for that. And that's something that I know that a lot of cube designers, definitely people that play in the 540 space, they love the cards that suck that they love. And they're always going to love those stinky cards, but there's not really space for them at this size.
No pet cards.
Yeah, yeah. There can be pet cards, but they have to be relatively strong. They don't have to be strong, but they have to be in line with everything else that's going on.
Have you ever considered building a cube that's less than 180 specifically for Minneapolis so the whole cube would get drafted?
I think that I like that there are things that are undrafted for the two-player format because I landed on 180, just reverse engineering. You need 45 for a traditional draft for every player. And so technically you could do 90 for two players. But how much can you actually have going on with only 90 cards? I'm sure you can do it. And I've heard of people using a smaller number of cards. I do like 180, both because I really get invested and I enjoy tweaking for balance. So that tension where Minneapolis draft puts a lot of pressure on making sure none of your cards are too weak. The four-player draft environment actually puts pressure on the other side of the power band. When you're drafting the entire cube, every power outlier, all the strongest cards are going to be drafted by somebody, and they are almost always going to be in somebody's deck. So you got to weed that stuff out too, because it can really make your cube less replayable if the same cards are deciding all the games. So you want to make sure that every card is desirable, but not too desirable. And I really enjoy that push and pull.
Are players' decks like tuned? Do they have like a really specific theme often? Or is it more just I'm seeing cards and I'm sticking to two, sometimes three colors, and I'm trying to build like a deck that has like the essentials, like enough removal, has enough card draw, enough creatures. When it's such a small amount of cards being drafted, 112, and in a grid draft, it's 180, is it possible to build a really synergistic deck that's really built around a theme?
It is, but that's going to vary by the cube list. So at this point, I've designed over a dozen different Twoberts. I've kind of lost track. I feel like I've gotten a little carried away with it, but I'm having fun. The amount of synergy in a given deck, this really does just kind of go back to what I was saying about designing a Twobert being very similar to designing a commander deck, where the decks that you draft are going to have as much synergy as the entire pile has. So generally, if you are sensitive to the same things that I am, where the two-player drafting format is going to raise the floor of the power level and the four-player environment is going to push down the ceiling to kind of make it so everything kind of works together. If your environment is really leaning into a synergy, those synergies are going to show up in the two-player draft. Like those decks are going to be tuned and they're going to do some powerful stuff. It's beyond just nuts and bolts. The original recipe Twobert is designed to be more nuts and bolts. Kind of the whole thing was kind of more of a proof of concept just to like demonstrate that you can play with this number of cards and draft in this way. So those decks are more just like, can I make my colors consistently and is my mana curve functional? That's kind of like the big skill that's actually tested in the original recipe Twobert is just like, did you draft too many 3-drops or is your curve sensible?
Yeah. And of course, like you were saying, you built many different Twoberts. I mean, looking at your cube cover page, you have pre-modern tuber, the original recipe, popper tuber, 180 vintage, peasant, tempo, eldrazi, spooky. You have tons of tubers. I feel like just looking through all of these, there's so many cool ones. But speaking of like a synergy driven tuber and kind of building it like a commander deck, one that really drew my eye that I was really looking at a lot was the artifact tuber. This is a tuber, of course, 180 cards, and it is very artifact focused, of course. Like it has 77 colorless cards, not as many lands. The color cards in there are very much artifact focused. And like you said, this one really does feel almost like it's all around one theme, like a commander deck would be.
Yeah, totally. And as you get more focus on a theme, that cube does kind of expand those boundaries where the weakest cards in that cube basically don't have text. Like you got to have Ornithopter to turn on the extremes of Mox Opal. That cube, once you start having a little bit of the Mox Opal, you got to have a lot. So, I have like an Ironworks kind of deck going on there, cranial plating. I have Skull Clamp, like you can argue that that one is maybe kind of pushing it, but the ceiling for these decks is very high, and Skull Clamp is not the only messed up thing going on. So that's kind of what's happening there. Like this is like a bracket 4 or 5 commander deck to kind of go back to that analogy where like you should try to do something broken when you draft that cube.
The cube brackets. Yeah, and I feel like the two-bird space kind of unlocks some kinds of cubes that maybe wouldn't be as possible or maybe more difficult to build because, like we were saying, you only really need a much smaller amount of cards to make a synergistic cube that's really based all around one thing work. Like I was thinking, like it would probably be hard to build a cube that is completely around enchantments and enchantress. I mean, I've seen them, for example, like the Brooding Saga cube by Joe, but I feel like in a tuber, because you need less cards, like in this artifact cube, there's only 11 of each colored card to really flesh it out. I feel like you can really build some very specific synergy cubes because you only need 180 cards.
Yeah, and that's often the limiting factor when I would look at kind of more niche themes when I would try to design for the 360. And I honestly like don't even know how people approach trying to design 540 card cubes when they really want to flesh out these niche themes because there's not enough cards. You have to do other things. And then you look at the cards side by side. Sometimes you open up a pack and it's just like I would never use like a Cogwork Librarian in this pack because no two of these cards would go in the same deck. And then when you go on this complete other focused direction with 180 cards, where I'm literally designing like this is kind of just one deck shuffled together, then it's just everything plays together and you'll have enough for almost anything you want to do. There are some things like I tried what I called the toxic tubert for a while that mixed all the different poison counter
Oh, wow.
mechanics. And that actually is kind of a funny example of how few different things you can fit together because infect and toxic are closer to invect versus regular combat damage than you might think. Like giant growth just plays very differently if you have toxic or infect. But more recently, I have used a lot of the bones of that design to work around a cube a little bit, inspired by Andy Mangold's 100 Ornithopters, where all of the creatures are razor swine that I call 30 to 50 feral hogs.
Oh,
And so you can kind of do whatever you want, but sometimes you got to get a little bit more creative, even still at the smaller size.
yeah, we got to build the 50 ornithopter cube now.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Finding like a number that fits into 180 that has anywhere near the punch of 100, that was a tough puzzle, but that was a cool design. It's still a bit experimental, but I've played it a number of times and some wild stuff happens there.
Yes. I liked the ornithopter cube when I played it, but I had no idea what I was doing, I'll be honest. So
That's
the
really
50 feral
common.
hog.
Yeah, the 100 Ornithopters, we have a different version of that assembled locally, and anytime somebody drafts it for the first time, it's like, what on earth am I doing?
Yes. And another question that I had for you was there's been a lot of discussion that I've seen online about the role of multicolored cards in cube. Like some cubes don't include any multicolored cards. Some cubes include a bunch. Like I usually try to have like four of each multicolor card, five of each multicolor card, and a 360 because I think it's fun. It puts people into directions. But I was curious about how multicolor cards really play in your experience when it's only two people. Because let's say that one person ends up a red white deck, and then the other person ends up a green blue deck. That leaves a lot of two color multicolor cards not being played at all. When you're playing a two-person draft format, and let's say that each player is going to end up in a two-color pair, so that leaves eight two-color pairs undrafted. Do you find that a lot of cards just kind of sit out in these multicolored sections and go undrafted often?
If you designed with the sensibility of trying to support specifically monocolor and two-color decks, that would happen. That is an element of even the original recipe tuber design, though, is it's very much trying to incentivize players playing three colors. When there's only three lands for any color pair and like a couple five color options, your mana for a three color deck is kind of better than for a two color deck, but not in a way where it's easy to play four or five. Like you need so many shock lands to make a four or five color deck work. But the two color cards, that is kind of a math thing, very similar to lands, where I like to have five or six cards per two color pair at 360. And so I generally like two or three for Twoberts. Yeah, it is important to scale the mana fixing with the volume of gold cards because the exact prop you're describing could very much. It's not something that has happened with any of my designs because I was always kind of mindful of that going in. But if you're not, that is certainly a way that things could break down in a way where there's kind of too many undesirables in every pack. It's usually the case that if you design for three colors, that at most one color is undrafted. And once you're in that space, like there's not that many gold cards that only touch on one of the five colors. Like if you have three of each, it's 12 total cards. And then you're also going to have, 12 mana fixing lands. But some or all of those, maybe they're not getting drafted because they're not in the packs that you're drafting, when you're drafting 112. So it is a theoretical issue, but it's one that I think that with just a little mindful design, you can get your way around.
Do you ever include three color cards in a tuber?
I am working on a design that does feature one card for every three color combination. The problem with three color is that you can't design a 10 three color environment. What you have then made is a four and a five color environment. Like these things just kind of have to overlap. It's just kind of math. It's just how things break down. I do think that you could do like a Khans of Tarkir or a Shards of Alara thing where you support five, and it more so than two color combinations. When you do three color, you probably have to do enemy or ally just so you actually like have them overlap in the right places. But if you do that, then I would like be designing an Abzan deck the same way that my 23 green cards in the original recipe Twoberts like a deck. I would try to like design kind of an Abzan deck, and it does break down in weird ways. Like you would want Abzan still to overlap a good amount with Sultai, where like what they're doing is not playing red. Like you want to make sure that your Siege Rhino and your DC go in the same deck, which is those two cards, great, sure. Yeah, they're four mana value cards. That'll work out. It can get weirder and it can get harder for sure.
So when you're designing tubers, I know we were talking about it before, that you're really not really into building like two color archetype pairs in your cubes. But I was really curious about when you're building like packages into a cube, how many cards do you actually need to flesh out, I would say, an archetype? Like, for example, I was thinking about it with my tuber, and I like to have like a little bit of an equipment theme in there. But really, to make the equipment theme work, in my experience, you don't really need many actual equipment payoff. Like, because let's say that you're doing a two-person draft and you see Stoneforge Mystic in the pack, and then you think to yourself, all right, I have a Stoneforge Mystic. I'm going to be an equipment deck. And then you get maybe one or two more equipment cards, and there's not going to be somebody else fighting you in the draft and like taking half your cards that you just were never going to see for your archetype. Tell me about how you approached putting in themes into your Twoberts, and how much density do you actually need to make them work?
Yeah, so different packages, of course, are going to require different volumes of things. And once it becomes something where you need like six or more cards in a deck, then you can't just put six cards on the cube and make it happen. Like it really has to become more of a macro theme at a smaller size at that point. But Stoneforge Mystic is kind of a good example to unpack because there's a really powerful way to do that, and there's a really modest way to do that. If you want to do Stoneforge Mystic and just have it grab like reconfigure creatures, and so it just finds things that are going to make decks anyway, you can put like a lot of that in, and presumably you'd have kind of an artifact theme going on. So it wouldn't just be, I only play this card if I have Stoneforge Mystic. And then if you want to do it at the high power level, like you put in a card like Sword of Fire and Ice, people are just probably going to put that card in their deck, right? So like you can have Stoneforge Mystic or not, and it'll be interesting to see where that card shows up. And maybe there's other incentives to play with equipment, just like blue flyers are going to want to get their hands on a Sword of Fire and Ice. I did have a small Stoneforge Mystic package in the Tempo Tubert once upon a time. Like, if you're grabbing Batterskull and Umezawa's Jite, you don't need more than two or three cards. Kind of the abridged version, and kind of what I'm getting at is if you want to do it at a modest power level, you kind of want to get a lot of that stuff in there. And if it's at a high power level, just peppering it in. You can do a lot more small packages if all the cards stand on their own merits.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing you were just saying about like you only have so much space in a tuber. And I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the designing of a tuber is you only have so many cards. Like for example, looking at your original recipe tuber, you only have 23 of each color. I mean, that's like nothing. That feels like how do you put in themes? Like you were saying, if it requires 8 cards to do a 1/1 counter theme or something, that's a big percentage of the cube. And one thing that I've found really important in my design of Twoberts and just like micro cubes, small cubes in general, is to have a lot of cross synergy and overlap between different cards. Like my perfect card, for example, is something that fits into multiple archetypes or different packages or themes, and then is also a piece of interaction. Like, for example, I see in your original recipe tuber, speaking of reconfigure creatures, I love Lion Sash because this card is an equipment. So you can get it with like the Stoneforge Mystic. It's an artifact creature, so it fits in artifacts. It gets 1/1 counters, so it fits in like a counters theme if you have a little bit of that going on. And it's graveyard hate, so it can like be interaction also. Tell me about that.
Yeah, if you are going to try to support more archetypes in a smaller card list, it's essential that you make these archetypes overlap. You can't really have something totally on an island because what that means is there's only 23 red cards, and red is like char, lava spike, just like red is burn. It's like, well, okay, if my black deck is Doomblades or like sacrifice, and red has no creatures to sacrifice. I guess I'll play like the burn spells that are removal spells there. But what is really overlapping? You get these cards where even if you are in one of the colors, some number of the cards on color are not going to be appealing. And if we talk about drafting Minneapolis draft, when you're looking at 7 card packs and the on color cards are unappealing, you're just not going to draft a functional deck. So I really try to be mindful of making sure that things play in multiple spaces. And like you were saying about Lion Sash, it checks multiple boxes. If you're in an artifact environment, like it's a card that's just an artifact. It just plays there. You can have equipment synergies. You can have like a SRAM that draws a card when you play your Lion Sash. And your green deck, green is tricky in artifact cubes because green does not do a lot that plays well with artifacts and mostly destroys them. But like that's a 1/1 counter card for your Heart in the Scales theme. And it's really important to identify these cross synergies and make sure that things play in multiple spaces. Like that's just essential to make it work, I think.
Yeah. And like one thing that I was thinking about and wondering I wanted to ask you about is, for example, if there's only 23 white cards in the cube and there's only 23 blue cards, not including multicolor, so 3 blue-white cards, let's say, how possible is it to really have like a whole deck that's dedicated around one theme if one deck is going to have more than half of the cards in a 2-color pair? Like, for example, if you wanted to have blue white have a little bit of like a blink theme going on that I see in the original tuber, like I see like Restoration Angel and I see like Phyrexian Metamorph that can copy like your ETB creatures. Is it possible to have like a whole deck that's kind of like a Blink theme if it would take more than half the cards to really make that functional?
Yeah, it's tough to do like a Blink theme. And I think that for that reason, when it comes to a lot of archetypes, I try to do exactly like what you were just observing and pepper in something that can really, with one or two cards, change the texture of your deck. I don't want to put ephemerate in a cube that's not just about that and it's not reverent of that power level because it's going to be in somebody's deck all the time in the four-player drafts and it's going to be a really high pick in the two-player drafts and like you just kind of you get tired of losing to ephemerate because Blink is a tough archetype because what makes a Blink deck good? Playing cards that are strong on their own and playing cards then make them stronger because you do the thing again, right? It's really playing with fire. But just having like a Restoration Angel hanging out there, it makes you more of a flash deck. You can more comfortably leave mana up on your opponent's turn. You get a taste of Blink without totally feeding the Blink sickos, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Blink sicko, so you can put in something that even kind of looks like a Blink card, and I'll figure out how to play Blink. Don't worry. And before we jump into a, I guess, sort of pack one, pick one here, what are some piece of advice you would give to somebody who has built a 360 or a 450 or a 540 and wants to build a 180 who might be thinking, oh, I don't know if I have the skills or something. Like, how would I even go about building a smaller size cube like this?
I think that the biggest difference, if you're coming from a 360, I think that a lot of your sensibilities are going to translate very effectively. There's some things you want to do differently. Just on an archetype front, making 180 cards work, you can do that with one archetype across the entire spectrum. You'll have enough cards to make it work, even across all five colors of Magic. That's generally not possible at 360 cards. So I have actually worked on some cubes that I have scaled up or down from 360 to 180 or the other way around. And if you're going from 360 to 180, it usually involves entirely removing some archetypes or just kind of holding on to a couple like standouts, like your Restoration Angel, or if you have cards that are good in a sacrifice deck, like the flagships are going to be maintained. Like you're not going to cut Scrap Heap Scrounger. Bloodghast can probably hang. It gets a little bit tougher if you have like a non-creature sacrifice outlet, just because it gets really specific and only makes one deck, and you're going to want to have creatures and interaction in all your decks. So definitely want to highlight the importance of a high volume of creatures unless you were very much playing in like a combo space or like some very controlling space where you have other win conditions. And having fewer creatures is going to help you highlight those other win conditions. But keep something that's really focused. It is what I would say when you're going down to 180. And if you're playing in the 540 space, this is going to be a more daunting transition for sure. You're not just cutting a couple archetypes, like you're removing broad swath of things. Like you're going to cut a lot of conceptual aspects of the cube if you want to whittle it down. I imagine that the things that draw you to draft 540 are kind of opposite what would draw you to draft 180. It's hard to imagine a player who takes 540 as like, I wish that I could cut 66% of this. Like, that's not why you built a 540 card cube. You probably want to maintain that cube. But then playing in the 180 card space, it's very much more the case that every single card slot matters. And if you change five cards from draft to draft, you will feel that in the drafts. You will feel that in the games. Where the larger cube sizes, certainly when you have more than you ever draft, if you only ever draft with 8 players of 540, part of the idea of that size is to limit the impact of changing any one card. Again, it is a lot more like messing with the space of designing a deck. And if you really like being able to push a button and to see what that button does, then 180 is a really fun size. Cannot recommend it enough. If you like a little bit more of the chaos, you can still draft with 2 players with that. Nobody's telling you have to change.
Now I'm kind of inspired to take like a commander deck and just add like 12 more cards to it and just Minneapolis draft and say, well, let's do it.
Yeah, it might be fun.
And yeah, I want to jump into a little Minneapolis draft here.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let me pull up the pack here. So we got 7 cards, and we got Shriekmaw, which is a classic. This is from the original Twoberts. 4 and a black, 3/2 fear, evoke for 1 and a black. When it comes to play, destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. We got Hollow Fountain, Blue-Eyed Chalk, Nissa Basswood Seer. Oh man, I have to remember what the back of this card does.
This is one of those cards that it certainly has been outmodded by like five different cards, but I like this one, and I deliberately try to keep the power level closer to this one.
This card's great. I mean, I loved Origins Draft. It's a 2 and a green for a 2/2. When it enters, search your library for a basic forest, put in your hand. And whenever a land enters, if you control 7 or more lands, you exile Nissa and return to the battlefield transformed. And then she's a planeswalker that 3 loyalty +1, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield. That's why I put it in your hand. -2, make a 4/4 green elemental. That's a legendary. And you can -7 to untap 6 lands and then become 6/6s. I mean, this card's great. I mean, it's just gets your land drops and then it can become kind of a win condition. Then we have Prismatic Vista, which is fetch line for 1 color, basics. We have Trostani, 3 Whispers, 2 green-white hybrid, and a white. It's a 4/4. You can pay 1 a green to give something Death Touch, green or a white to give something Vigilance, and then 2 and a white to give something Double Strike. I mean, that card hits like a truck. This card's strong.
Yep.
We got Preordain, of course, blue sorcery, scry 2, then draw a card. And then Baleful Strix, blue and a black, flying Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. All right. So walk us through how we're going to do the Minneapolis draft. I guess we'll say, what would be your pick from here? And what would you hope to wield that I didn't take?
So this is a really good example of the considerations that come up in Minneapolis draft because I'm building my deck and I want to figure out what you're doing with your deck. So the signals that I send you are going to influence what you do, but it's kind of a little bit more important for me to read your signals. So I want to be mindful of what I'm sending and be prepared for what I'm going to receive. So you could just take the most boring card, Prismatic Vista. It's going to go in any deck. That's the level 1 first pick here. But you do want to think about what you're passing and how the cards combine. So your opponent's going to get 2 cards, right? And if you pass a Baleful Strix along with Shriekmaw Preordain, there's some good selection, good reason to go into blue-black with any combination of that. The Tristani and the Nissa, good bones for green-white. Hallowed Fountain Preordain, like that's a really good start for blue-white. Maybe Hallowed Fountain Shriekmaw, maybe they're a real Esper sicko. I don't know. I personally do like to plant my flag a little bit because I don't know what you're going to pass me. So if I take the Vista and I'm thinking, okay, it seems likely that I'm either going to get a blue-black pair or a green-white pair. Like it seems like I probably will be able to get Tristani Nissa or 2 blue-black cards. But what if you pass me a pack and there's just a nice combination of a blue and black card and a nice combination of a green and white card? There's no overlap at all. So at that point, I'm kind of gambling. I don't know what you picked. So I can play my Vista, sure. But what's going on your end? So I think that there's a real argument here. I might just snap off this Preordain. Because if you pass me that Hallowed Fountain back, I'm sitting pretty setting up blue-white, maybe going into a third color at that point. If you pass me back the Shriekmaw and the Baleful Strix, I shot the moon. I got the best possible combination of cards here. So I'm kind of eyeing that Preordain. That's going to be my pick.
Hmm. That's a good way to think about it. I mean, yeah, thinking about what your opponent is going to take from the pack, what they would go into. Because then I'm almost thinking about like take the Prismatic Vista and then know what I'm passing, which is like probably a green-white deck or a blue-black deck, like we talked about, and then kind of take the opposite based off what is my opponent's pack, hopefully. Like take the Prismatic Vista, and then if I see a red-white card, then I can kind of go into red-white and hope that they end up the blue-black, so we're not really fighting. But that's definitely a really interesting, different strategy when it comes to Minneapolis Draft 2 of do you want to be fighting with them so maybe your decks aren't as good, or do you kind of just want to be in separate lanes so you're kind of, oh, we don't have to overlap at all and have good decks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's kind of a tension there between staying open and planting your flag. I'm somebody I like to force a little bit, so that always biases my decisions a little bit. And is absolutely makes sense to just first pick a card you know you're playing. Like Prismatic Vistig is very safe, but picking a monocolor card in an environment where you can generally expect to play 3 colors, and if you're playing 2 colors, it means that like you got everything, like the stars lined up, and your deck's probably very good. I do think that there's really good reasons to first pick a really good monocolor card. And like Preordain actually is maybe my favorite cube card of all time. Talk about Prismatic Vista going in every deck. If I have my druthers, I'm playing blue, and Preordain goes in all my blue decks. So that one does stand out on power level in that way, even if it's a little innocuous.
I mean, you can't go wrong with like taking a cantrip. It's almost like taking a land. It's going to go into every blue deck. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and
I'll splash for a cantrip.
This one's messed up. It is barely legal in modern.
Yes. And yeah, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great having you. Anything you want to say here or shout out before we wrap up?
Well, I appreciate you having me on here. I always like to spread the good word of Twoberts and also, get this little look under the hood at Minneapolis draft. It's the kind of thing where I promise you, once you try it, you're going to be hooked. Of course, I gotta plug my show here if anyone wants to check out more of my thoughts on Cube Draft. 180 MTG is the podcast. It should be anywhere you listen to your podcast. And yeah, I post about that on Blue Sky. I'm not super active on social media, but if you got a question you want to shoot my way, Blue Sky is the place to do it. Ryan Overdrive at bluesky.social or whatever the weird handles are on that website. I still haven't gotten a feel for that, honestly.
I totally get that. And if anyone happens to be in the area of Connecticut, we're always looking for more Cube people to join our Cube group. Reach out to me and I'll shout it out again. ConnectiCube is going to be happening. Yeah, thank you all so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, follow, check out the 180, and I hope you have a great night.